Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very, very much indeed for joining us for this interactive session in the Sustainable Development Goals tent, a new initiative at the World Economic Forum, and as it says up here, a place for business with a purpose. I'd like to thank DSM for hosting and the whole tent, and learnt this morning the extent to which business really is changing. I thought DSM stood for Dutch State Mining. We learnt today that it was doing something meaningful. A good start for this tent and what follows. Our session today will, I hope, address a very meaningful question for all of you. What can nature do for us? The role of biodiversity in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. My name is Mike Rands. I'm the director, privileged to be the director of the Cambridge Conservation Initiative, which itself is a collaboration between the University of Cambridge and a cluster of conservation organisations that work globally but are based in and around Cambridge. You can see their logos if our panel dip their heads. Thank you. So the aim of CCI is to transform or contribute to the transformation of our understanding and conservation of nature and the natural capital it represents. We bring together the scholarship, research and teaching of the University of Cambridge with a group of civil society organisations with global networks, practical experience, policy, knowledge and plenty of action on the ground for biodiversity and for people. There are two key reasons for you to be here today. The first, as some of you will have heard at the Congress last night from Sir David, the Garden of Eden is no more. We are facing an incredible threat to the world's natural systems. The World Economic Forum, please don't try and read the slide. The World Economic Forum 29 Risk Report recognises the problem for biodiversity and indeed many other environmental interconnected risks. The loss of biodiversity and ecosystem collapse is in the top quartile there, together with three other environmental risks. These are risks to sustainable development and to all life on Earth. The second reason we're here is when business sees a problem, it seeks solutions. And to have WEF members with their experience of innovation, integration, novelty is invaluable to these global challenges that we're all facing here today. We need your innovation for technology change, for governance, for behaviour change, and for cultural change if we are to live sustainably on this planet with the other species that we value. This event today will be in two parts. The first is a panel discussion who will set the scene and take questions from you and respond, I hope. That will be followed by a series of roundtable sessions that will explore ideas and solutions as to how we can work together to address the questions that we'll be discussing in the first half. If you're tweeting, I've been encouraged to say please use the hashtag #BusinessForSDGs. And now it's my enormous pleasure to welcome our panel of experts drawn from across CCI, and first and foremost to welcome the chair, Professor Stephen Toop, who is the 346th Vice-Chancellor of the University of Cambridge. He's a distinguished academic in human rights, law, international relations, and university leadership. So let me please, without further ado, hand over to Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike, and good afternoon to all of you. The UN Sustainable Development Goals offer a blueprint to achieve a better and more sustainable future. It's a blueprint in which living within our planetary boundaries is thoroughly integrated into the delivery of peace, prosperity, equality, and justice for all. But against that global ambition, As Mike noted, the World Economic Forum's 2019 Global Risk Report puts biodiversity loss and ecosystem collapse in the top quadrant of threats, in the top 10 risks in terms of both their likelihood and their impact. As Vice Chancellor of Cambridge University, I've made no secret of my belief that Cambridge has a duty to engage with the great challenges facing humanity. Tackling the challenge of biodiversity loss requires action on multiple fronts. First, it needs research to understand the drivers of loss and to identify solutions. Cambridge University is, of course, a world-leading research institution. Its impact delivered to broader society through the rich history of collaboration amongst disciplines, sectors, across medicine, basic science, technology, social sciences, the arts, and into industry and wider society. The Cambridge Conservation Initiative is the first effort to partner between the university and civil society at scale. Cross-disciplinary and cross-sectoral collaboration, making research matter to the world, is CCI's founding principle. Secondly, tackling biodiversity loss requires leadership. Leaders are change makers, those with vision and the ability to convince others to share the vision and to work collectively towards achieving it. Together, CCI's 10 partners form the world's largest cluster of conservation researchers, practitioners, educators, and policy specialists, with networks in over 180 nations across the world, representing a unique critical mass of expertise. And today, we bring together representatives from those 10 partners to share their thoughts. I'm pleased to introduce Inger Andersen, please put up your hand, Director General of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature; Ruth Davis, Deputy Director of Global Programs, Royal Society for the Protection of Birds; Joanna Elliott, Senior Director, Conservation Partnerships of Fauna and Flora International; Corley Pretorius, the Deputy Director of the UN Environment World Conservation Monitoring Center, long title; Patricia Zurita, Executive Director of BirdLife International; and from the University of Cambridge Conservation Research Institute, Professor Bhaskar Vira, and board member of both CCI and the World Economic Forum, Mr. Andre Hoffman. Finally, tackling biodiversity loss requires a dramatically heightened awareness among members of the public and key decision makers. The WEF Global Risk Perception Survey represents your awareness that environmental risk will only accelerate. We hope that today's panel, discussion, and roundtable will begin to identify some key drivers to help all of us rise to the challenge that we face and, frankly, to rise fast, given the increasingly narrow window of opportunity before us. It seems to me that restoring and sustaining the natural world is a powerful feat of creativity and imagination, but also a powerful commitment to building a more abundant and equitable society. And with that, we'll begin the panel discussion. Over to you, Bhaskar.
Thank you very much for that introduction, and I'm conscious that there's a number of us on the panel, so I'll keep my remarks brief. I'm going to make three quick points by way of introduction. A number of people know that the SDGs, when they were agreed in 2015, represented a significant shift in global thinking from what had preceded them. Specifically, in contrast to the Millennium Development Goals, these are universal goals for all countries, not just for the developing world. And they emphasize integration. They don't allow us to cherry pick our favorite goals or targets. They require us to work across all as far as possible. And that is really what makes them transformative, because delivery is going to require a lot more than just business as usual, and it's going to require collaboration across all sectors. So having this conversation here is really important. With that as the framework, the role of nature is particularly important, Now, we've got headline goals. If you look at the 17 goals, there are visibly goals about nature. There are goals about terrestrial life, marine life, climate change, water. But actually to focus on the goals obscures the role that nature actually provides across the full set of 17 SDGs. And that's really important. When you look at the targets, they explicitly mention things like investing in wetlands, investing in water-related ecosystems, investing in genetic diversity for agriculture, providing sustainable tourism options, investing in our natural heritage, promoting lifestyles that are in harmony with nature. Now, these are hidden within a number of the other sustainable development goals. So actually to think about the role that nature plays in relation to the SDGs, we have to think about all 17 goals and not focus in just on the headline goals that many organizations tend to think as the nature-related SDGs. I'd argue that's actually a very narrow way to think about the SDGs. And indeed, if I'm going to be slightly provocative, there's a sort of very popular wedding cake representation of the SDGs, and I worry that that actually obscures the role that, that nature plays in the SDGs, because it seems to suggest that nature is at the bottom and all the other goals are separate. Well, actually, they're not. They're all fully integrated. My final point is that helps us to make the instrumental case for investing in nature. Nature matters because it delivers for human well-being. It shouldn't crowd out the moral case. It should crowd in the moral case. And that's really important. We shouldn't see the instrumental case and the moral argument as alternatives, but important complementary arguments so that we actually encourage people to do the good thing, but we also incentivize people to do the good thing. And that crowding in is going to be a really important process going forward. We shouldn't see these as alternatives. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to see you all here. I'm going to follow up from what Bhaskar just ended. Without nature, our species, Homo sapiens, will not survive. That's the bottom line. So it's not either or. We have to make sure that we can protect and factor nature conservation and natural systems management and functional systems. This is not about planting trees in car parks. This is about ensuring that we are sustaining ecosystems. For those of you probably like me, or for those of you who love coffee like me, may have heard last week the media talking about that we are about to lose 6 of the 10 wild species of coffee. Yeah, because of habitat loss. That means that deforestation and habitat loss is threatening us having other species of coffee that can enable us to continue to drink coffee in the morning or whenever you're actually drinking it over time, because Robusta and Arabica are not going to be able to adapt properly to all of the changes that the planet is leaving. So unless we actually protect all that saving accounts of coffee species, we're not going to have coffee in the future. Now, not all is gloom and doom, although we and the conservation movement tend to be a little bit gloomy most of the time. We have proven together that when conservation works with business partners, we can actually make miracles happen. And we have brought species from the brink of extinction back. And why does that matter? Because each of these species are extremely important for the functioning of the world. Our economy cannot thrive without these species. And in some cases, by enabling these things to happen, we can create new economic opportunities for big companies or for small companies. So because I'm from BirdLife, I have to give you a birdie example. There's a place in India called Nagaland. Special, very special for the migration of the Amur falcons, an amazing bird that flies from Northeast Asia all the way to Africa. In Nagaland, until 3 years ago, local communities were shooting and eating 100,000 Amur falcons a year. 100,000 falcons a year. We have been working with private sector and with the local communities and demonstrating that if you actually bring birders to see the amazing migration of the Amur falcons in Nagaland, you make a lot more money and you don't have to shoot them. So here it is, an economic opportunity out of protecting nature. Now, it's not only about protecting, it's also about restoring. We are at a time where our ecosystems are no longer able to sustain the rhythm of growth that this planet has. So there's a huge opportunity, economically speaking, for the business world to make sure that we can restore some of the functionality that nature has lost. And that brings me to my last point. I want, from the conservation world, to do a mea culpa, because we have not made it easy for you, people from the business world, to provide you the information that you need about the status of nature in a way that you can assimilate it and factor it into your decision making. We make it really complicated, and all of us in the conservation world talk very different languages, but we're changing. 3 years ago, together, we launched the Key Biodiversity Area Partnership in Hawaii. Many of the partners are here, and we were hosted by IUCN. And we're starting to tell the private sector what are the most important places for nature with one single voice. Now, if we work together, business and civil society and governments, and that's going into the fourth revolution, we will be able to start innovating and making sure that our information about nature is useful to you. So that's the end.
Thanks very much. Andre.
Thank you very much. I would like to talk to you not about a species, but about a habitat. What can nature do for us? Nature provides us with some of the basic necessity for the life infrastructure, for the life supporting system. One of them is water. And one of the habitats which has been over the years the most discredited, one of the habitats which has less love brought into, is wetlands. Now, it's easy to understand why. Wetlands stink. They're full of mosquitoes. They're difficult to manage. Sometimes they overflow, sometimes they underflow. It's complicated. But it is an incredibly rich environment. About 60% of the world's species are infiltrated to wetlands, which only represents about 20% of the global surface. You notice this number a bit round, it's because I don't really remember the detail. I'm just trying to get the picture there. And I think the important thing of these wetlands is that they are absolutely crucial into regulating the cycle of water, which we need for survival. Water is a little bit of a logistic issue, and logistic is something that we humans should be quite good at. You know, it's never in the right quantity, at the right quality, in the right time, in the right place. And you know, if you look at what the DHL is trying to do for us, it's exactly the opposite mission. So we should be able to do something about this, in particular by maintaining healthy wetlands and maintaining them as wild as possible. I've been to countless meetings where people are telling me that particular wetland is in the way. We need to drain it, we need to grow things on it, and we will replace the storage capacity and the water cleaning capacity of that particular wetland by a beautiful new power plant, by a beautiful new sewage system. It's expensive, it provides jobs, but it doesn't work, and it is probably not in the right place anyway. And it's an example I can quote time and time again, and I'm sure that members of the panel have had similar experiences. Another use for wetlands which people tend to favor is where you need a lot of stable, flat surface. So you cut the water, and suddenly you have a huge area with flat. And in big towns, that's where you build airports. And that's explained to you why every time you take the plane in winter, you're stuck by fog. Because fog develops in wetland, and every wetland in the big town is an airfield. Anyway, just a plaidoyer on my side for please look after your wetlands. Make sure that they participate to the web of life the way we know them. You all have a wetland close to you where you are. It can go from a small pond to the big lagoons on the side of the river. They have a purpose. They are part of the web of life, and I really would encourage you to look at them again. Thank you.
Thank you, Andre. Corley.
Thank you very much. I would like to highlight 3 ways that nature contributes to our economic system. And the first one, I would like to explain some of the direct benefits that we are now, or that we are recording through our work to curate the international trade in endangered species. So through this CITES trade database, we monitor the flows of different species all over the world, really. And in 2017, we've estimated that the flow of species, some 28 million individuals, into the European Union is almost at €2 billion. So these all obviously get transformed into anything from a handbag to a table, and a lot of them also get onward traded, so there's additional economic benefit. So that direct economic benefit is maybe not that obvious to people. Secondly, coming back, and thanks to Andre's sustainable wetlands, it's a no-brainer, or it's very self-evident that farmers are dependent on land and on water. But today our food systems are so connected and internationally, and this land and water actually flows across borders in our global world. We've estimated in the 2011, I think, National Ecosystem Assessment of the United Kingdom that 66% of the UK's water needs are met through food imports. So that's basically, and the UK is not a dry place, so there's a lot of water in the UK, and still 66% is imported. Similarly, Brazil gains the benefit of about 1 million hectares in land by importing soy from Brazil. So these are all sort of global movements in what you like as natural capital assets or ecosystem services that's really part of the environment dimension of globalization 4.0. The other thing that was in the risk report, and I think it's top of our minds, is that we will need to develop our collective pathways to deal with climate change. And here nature can continue to deliver some of these services. It's anything from erosion control. Wetlands are great at flood control, but also things such as carbon sequestration, coastal zone protection, and also, I forgot that last bit. Sorry.
It's good for everything.
It's good for everything, yes. But anyway, it is good for everything. The thing that we need to do, though, is that we need to manage nature much better to reap this long-term sustainability. The way that we're managing it at the moment and not incorporating it in our natural capital accounts is not setting us up to really gain that benefit of climate protection. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The title of this session is What Can Nature Do for Us? Well, maybe we should think about what we can do for nature, because as you've heard from the previous speakers, actually, without nature, we have nothing. Nature is the very underpinning of humanity, and the risk report bears this out. The business community knows this, and that's what I'll speak a little bit about, the financing and the business, because there are opportunities here, and the fact that businesses have voted not with their feet, but with their votes, and their feedback in the survey, in the risk survey, shows exactly this. So we have fertile grounds for understanding that this matters. It matters because the very absence of nature means the very failure of humanity as we know it. So that's sort of the basic stuff here. But when we see private sector stepping up and stepping in, it is interesting because private sector often responds to consumer demands, to regulation, sorry, but somebody's got to say it, as well as to incentives, right? So all of these around matter. Now, consumer demand is interesting because we have this new generation that is much more aware, they're connected, they know, and they vote with their dollar bills or their Swiss francs. And they make certain purchases dependent on their understanding of the impact and the footprint of what they buy. So that's a good thing. Shareholders obviously also are very sensitive to different views of the population and of the reputation of the company. But we need to now think about taking some of these things to scale. Let's think, for example, about the organic industry, organic materials that you buy, the milk or whatever. There's greater awareness around this, less fertilizer, insecticides, pesticides, what have you, agricultural inputs. That business has quadrupled over the last 7 years. It's now, for 2022, we're looking at $260 billion business. So that's just a little facet here. I'm not saying that organic will solve the problems of the world, but it shows that people are voting with their dollars. Now, how do we take business and finance investment to scale to safeguard the future of this planet Earth? because there will be 10 billion the day after tomorrow, and each person has to eat. So there is an opportunity then for business to think about sustainability. There's an opportunity, just like marketing of organics worked, there's an opportunity of marketing a plant-rich diet. The EAT report has just come out, EAT Lancet report. Think about this. There are business opportunities here, because what we do not have is an opportunity to continue expanding agriculture into protected area, into tropical forest. And finally, what obviously I'm very pleased to see Christiana Paschke-Palmer here, the Executive Director for Executive Secretary for the Biodiversity Convention, because the convention has some targets, and these targets will come to an end in 2020. And what matters now is that business steps in and works on and helps define targets that will work to ensure a safeguarding of our planet for tomorrow. And that's a critical to-do item for the collective conservation movement, but even more so, I say, for the business movement to safeguard your supply and your security of supply for the future and your shareholders' income. Thank you.
Thank you. Joanna.
Hi, I've been asked to say a few words about looking for solutions and priorities going forwards based on Fauna and Flora International's long-term corporate partnerships, and particularly from the extractive sector. So I'll focus on that. I think for me, the key learning is that actually we know a lot of what needs to be done. The big challenge here is implementation, and implementation at scale. So our corporate partnerships are calling for governments to set a level playing field on the regulatory front and to fight corruption. Because without these, we are rewarding poor-performing companies and we are penalizing compliance. So that's step number one. The next thing they're calling for is that we all work together to apply the spatial planning that we know is the tools that are available and to adhere to globally agreed standards, such that in the current wave of infrastructure investment, which we know is sorely needed, and particularly in Africa, that actually the potential risk to habitat fragmentation is properly mitigated. We can have development and we can save nature, so there's a challenge to do that. Our corporate partners are also working with us to help to better quantify risks and opportunities. So we urgently need to turn these risks and opportunities into true pricing and shadow share prices that actually mean something to boards, financiers, investors, and to customers alike, so that better decision-making can be taken across the board by all of us on that front. Another area which we strongly need is actually leadership from the top. We observe that the best performing companies in terms of environmental performance are those where the CEOs and chairs are actually openly engaged in public on nature sustainability issues. And this sustainability push is then lived out with whole company responses. Otherwise, we find that actually the central headquarters operates in a really good way, and then operating companies or joint ventures underneath are left free to run their own path. And then also we recognize in these partnerships the need, as Inge says, to translate the SDG targets into workable business strategies and to establish business-to-business collaborations and partnerships such that best practice is readily spread. And one of the areas we're seeing that start to happen in is within the mining sector on restoration, where mining companies are now quite used to working in timeframes of multiple decades to set restoration in successful pathways, and that learning is all there to be used by other sectors. And then finally, what we really need is these new technologies and innovations to be shared among all sectors. We know this is our best chance of finding nature-positive business solutions that can actually finally start to break the dependency of growth on nature, and this we really urgently need. We commend and are working with initiatives from batteries to plastics and packaging, from things like acoustic monitoring through to blockchain-based green payment systems, all of which have huge potential for us to move forwards.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Go ahead.
Thank you very much. I have the dubious pleasure and honour of going last, and I'm going to use it to commend optimism to everyone in the room. I think it is entirely possible that we can solve these problems together, and I believe that because I work for a conservation organisation that produces practical solutions on the ground all the time. So I'm going to use my couple of minutes to put three very simple challenges to the business community in the room. The first is around transparency. I'm sure everyone will recognise that in order to be able to make change, we have to be able to measure what it is that we're doing, what impact we're having, and we need to understand then how to drive change through our businesses. It can appear that it's extremely complex to measure your impact on the natural environment, but the reality is that we are already developing tools to enable us to do that. I commend highly to you the Natural Capital Protocol, which is developed to enable businesses to do that. But I do not think that this will work, and it will not matter unless as businesses you set ambitious goals for yourselves about what you're trying to achieve. And I commend to you the goal of securing your business investment in the recovery of nature up and down your supply chains. To make sure that you are actually doing that, you need to connect to practical solutions on the ground. So everywhere in your supply chain, you'd need to understand what is happening on the land that is the foundation, or the seas that are foundation of your business. If you do those two things, you'll start to move towards a progressive place. The second thing that I would like to commend to you is to think about your voice in establishing level playing fields through good regulation. We're working in the moment in the UK on a proposition around an environment bill that would set a goal, statutory goal, for the government to deliver the recovery of nature by taking policy action over a 25-year framework. That bill and that goal will live or die on the amount of support that business voices in our political economy give to that target. So you guys need to ask yourself in the business community, is your lobbying effort working towards or against the recovery of nature? Because governments will not act without you, and you cannot act without government. Second recommendation. My third, a very simple one. Think about innovation, but think about whether or not the way in which you choose to innovate is something that is comfortable for your existing business model and supports incumbency, or whether you genuinely are interested in innovation that takes you out of your comfort zone. And because this is a world of exciting business jargon, I'm going to offer something up to you as a new piece of WEF jargon. I doubt it'll fly, but let me have a go. Innovation, I think, is not just about technological innovation. In this space, it is about recovering and remembering what we have lost. Natural solutions are often there in front of you. The problem that you have is not being able to understand that those solutions offer you something in the business community. So I offer you the concept of arco-ecological innovation as something for you to explore. Recover your memory. In that way, you'll be able to put solutions in place that work with the grain of nature. This is something we can do together.
Thank you very much, all of you. The last two speakers, Joanna and Ruth, really emphasized the importance of measurement, technological solutions, the ability to change through regulation and other public interventions, but also really the opportunity that exists for business. And in fact, I think that was a theme for all of our panelists. I'm going to open the floor to questions, but just before we do that, so please, we need to get some microphones out around. Before we do that, I want to, though, go back to where we started, in a sense, to Bhaskar, because I want to ask how we connect the behavioral change that's required, both in terms of big picture behavioral change at the political and social level, but also individual behavioral change that's required, that is in addition to or complementary to the technological, innovative opportunities that exist. How do we get at those really fundamental problems?
So I think that's a really important point, and it's what I was trying to emphasize about crowding in. We really need to connect back with the fact that we just love nature, and there could be no better place to say this with Sir David sitting in the front row staring at me. The love that we have for nature is why we all care. And that has to be at the heart of why we all act, at whatever scale we're acting. But in addition to that, we have to try and crowd in all the other motivations. And they will come from regulation, they will come from incentives, but at the heart of it has to be the good thing to do. It's a good thing to do because it's good for the planet and it's good for ourselves.
Questions? Anyone, please just put up your hand and we'll move the microphone around. The gentleman right over here, blue shirt or purple, can't tell.
I think it's blue.
Okay.
Thank you, that was a great panel. So my name is Sanjan, I'm the CEO of Conservation International. Lots of good friends up there. All of you spoke very eloquently to business. And you made this case, and we understand why you're making the case. Business can be transformative, they can move fast. But what we found that unless you also have governments, policies will undermine things that businesses are trying to do. I see Jeff Seabright in here. So Unilever is trying to do something good, for example, in North Sumatra. Unless the government of North Sumatra then supports that, it'll ultimately undermine it. And the consumer doesn't care whether Unilever is selling something good or someone else is selling something bad. They care if Sumatra is burning, right? So tell me about the thing that I miss at World Economic Forum sessions. I often see business panels, and I often see government panels, but I'm not seeing the government-business panel, where one reinforces the other.
Thanks very much. We'll take a couple of questions at the same time. I think there was someone else over in that direction. Right up here then, right here. Right there.
John Stasinski, I'm Vice Chairman of PIMCO, and we're a big asset manager, mostly in credit and fixed income. One of the things I've noticed, and I'd like your reaction to this, this is a very much a like-minded group of people here, but as I go around the world and I talk to sovereign wealth funds and governments and government pension funds and corporations, it's the Nordic region, now Germany, selectively in the UK, Canada, and the states of New York and California that have very strong both government overview about sustainability goals and how it relates to scoring equities and scoring bonds. And they're getting to the point of being ruthless about it. And until the investment community knows that people are not going to buy corporations that have low-ranked SDG ratings, nothing is going to change. So it is about the government enforcing it. It is about this sort of awareness. But the thing I'm concerned about is there is a cultural issue globally. The Asians investors are not that interested in this. I'm sure this will end up in a soundbite on some news program later today. But they're not. They're not that interested in it. And there's a problem when you go to Asian investors because it's just a lack of prioritization. And there's a big pool of capital in Asia that drives a lot of corporate decision making.
Thank you very much. There's a woman right behind there.
Ann Grossman, I'm the founder of Minerva Ventures in California. I've been hearing a lot about plastics and fossil fuels destroying the climate, pesticides. Humanity tried to abolish slavery and child labor, and we've done a pretty good job around the globe. Why are we not abolishing the practice of exploiting fossil fuels, creating plastics and pesticides? It doesn't make any sense to do all this work around and still allow these businesses to be pumping toxins into our planet.
Thank you very much. Last question right up here.
Thank you. I'm Martin Stockton. I'm with Systemic. It took us some time to convince ourselves that combating climate change is in fact a good proposition for growth, for prosperity, and also for better business. And that is a new norm that increasingly is being embraced by business, and some of the business leaders in this room took a very leading part in that. For some time we thought that, in fact, biodiversity conservation can travel in the tailwind, or with the tailwind of the climate agenda. Now we are finding out that it's better to stay with 1.5 degrees than to move to 2 degrees, and that forces us into a couple of very uncomfortable trade-offs. Is it still good enough to have the climate change horse in front of the biodiversity wagon, or do we need to rethink our narrative and our strategy to make sure this ends up as a global agenda?
Thank you very much. I'm going to let everyone on the panel have one last word. Just try to pick one or two ideas, not each one addressing all of them. I'll start with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to talk a little about the role of government, actually, because it was raised a few times. I guess the challenge I would put back to people in the room is an understanding of where power lies in the relationship between business and government. I don't know whether you would agree with me, but my perception over my lifetime is that governments have become less and less powerful and businesses have become more and more powerful. And that in that context, I think businesses can no longer afford a schizophrenia that suggests that in some way or another, actually, political power lies in the hands only of the executive, and they are the recipient of that. If you take collective responsibility for decision-making and recognize that the business community is actually shaping the society in which it operates at the moment, then you have to work in a space where business starts to come forward with positive regulatory propositions. I don't see that yet, and I think that does speak to the challenge that the gentleman put here about where are governments. Frankly, often they're hiding from what they think the impacts of their decisions will be on the perception of their business stakeholders. So this relationship between business and government and where power lies is something people have to get a grip of at the level of the political economy in the world and in this room, I suspect.
As Ruth has handled government, I will turn now to the climate change point. Just a quick point on that. My view is my research shows that the last 10 years has brought up a whole load of new evidence that demonstrates how closely biodiversity and climate change issues are actually linked, that actually one drives the other. So the whole resilience of ecosystems is what will allow us to respond to climate change, but also biodiversity holds a key to mitigating climate change. I agree. I do not think these two things can anymore be pursued as separate agendas. They are inextricably linked, and I think as a community we need to grasp hold of that and push forwards on both counts simultaneously.
Maybe just to continue on from that. In COP15, when we had an agreement that just agreed on 2 degrees and nothing else everything else fell apart, we had something called a Celsius scale. And that had been kicking around for a while, but it was not without importance. Because what we got in Copenhagen, then enshrined in Paris, obviously, was that we understand that there's a degree, and we understand that there's a scale, and what we didn't get were lots of other targets. We didn't get a target for adaptation. We didn't get a target in Paris for acidification, et cetera, for ocean warming. But we got, and we understood the 2 degrees. Now, this is where biodiversity has fallen short. Biodiversity Convention has come up with 20 targets referred to as the Aichi targets. Some of them are unmeasurable, like reduce harmful pesticides and subsidies, et cetera, et cetera. But there's learning here to be done. And so that's why what matters now is that the Biodiversity Convention and the community around this are talking about what should this apex target look like? Is there a scale for biodiversity, and how do we construct that? And once it's constructed, how will businesses be able to use that in measuring their footprint? We at IUCN, with many other partners, are working exactly on that. Good ideas are born in academia, are born in private sector, are born in the academic sector, and this is one of these things that we're pushing. Will it go into the convention negotiations or not? Don't know. But people didn't know about Celsius when Celsius was around, that it would end up in Paris. So I think getting to that, getting to a degree of understanding how we measure impact precisely, simply, so that that child who is 15 years old understands what it means, 1.5 degree equivalent, that's where we've got to get. Thank you.
I am going to pause us for a moment, if you don't mind, because there's someone who's going to be speaking who is on a very, very tight schedule and has to go off and speak at the main Congress Hall with Prince William later. And I think it might be wise to ask him to come up briefly, and then we'll finish, and then we'll continue with the rest of the panel. So you may remember that in my opening remarks, I said that tackling biodiversity loss requires a heightened level, I said a dramatically heightened level of awareness among key decision makers and members of the public. And I want to pay tribute here to the extraordinary contribution that Sir David Attenborough has played in transforming public and political engagement with conservation issues through a lifetime's work in broadcasting. And I think, Sir David, more than simply raising our awareness, you've catalyzed seismic shifts sometimes in consumer demand, consumer behavior, changes which have opened up a space for responsible and sustainable leadership to flourish across all sectors. So I'd like to have you come up for a moment, if I may, and offer a few reflections before I know you have to go. Please join me in welcoming Sir David Attenborough.
Thank you very much. You know, I think this is an enormously encouraging, optimistic gathering. The fact that you, champions of the natural world, are speaking to you, the leaders of the business world. I'm old enough to remember when those two oppositions were seen as oppositions, when it was us, the naturalists, pleading the natural world, pleading for you, the business world, to cast us a few gifts here and there and make allowances, because it was a nice, civilizing thing to do. The fact that you have invited the voice of nature to this important conference of the great leaders of industry of the world is hugely encouraging. Of course, there's no one simple answer. There's no one simple solution. But the fact that we are together as human beings and seeing the problem as a united problem is hugely, hugely optimistic. We are, without any question, facing a crucial point in the history of humanity and of this planet. And the solutions have to come from humanity as a whole, from business and from the understanding of the natural world. The simple fact is that every mouthful of food that we eat, every breath of air that we take, comes from a healthy natural world. We cannot exist without the natural world. Oddly enough, it's taken a few centuries for humanity to realize that. You have. I wish you every success in your, what you call deliberations, because the future of humanity and the future of the natural world depends upon the wisdom and the cooperation which you are about to create. Good luck to you all, and thanks on behalf of the rest of the people of the world, and indeed the natural world. Thank you very much.
I'm very proud to say that Sir David is a graduate of the great University of Cambridge and is a wonderful supporter. And in fact, all of our colleagues from these conservation, the Cambridge Conservation Initiative, inhabit the David Attenborough building. So it's really quite wonderful. We'll continue. Corley.
Thank you very much. I would like to respond to the bit about business and government relations, and then also the interlinkages between climate and biodiversity. I think business can do a lot to help governments to overcome what is a very basic structural challenge in that they organized in silos. And business obviously works across environment, finance, all of these different things, infrastructure. And that is one of the things that's very hard for the way that our governance systems and our regulatory systems are set up to overcome. It goes further than just the national level also, because many of you have infrastructure and business dealings and transactions all over the world. So by extension, also internationally, helping to put the demand out there for stronger international commitments by governments on biodiversity would be really helpful. In terms of the climate agenda, absolutely, these two are so interconnected. You know, the land degradation component of the Climate Framework Convention is a significant part of the work that needs to be done. Up to Paris, we have done most of the work to basically slam on the brakes and to get to deal with the commitment to mitigate. I think going forward, and this is where the connection is really strong, is our adaptation pathways, because there we will be dependent on nature, but we need to be very aware of it, that nature itself will be changing in this process also. So there's much more dynamic relationship that we will need to work with there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andre. And I'm going to have to ask the last three of you to be quite quick because we want to get to the table discussion.
Mike is going with
Mike,
the bag.
that's my bag.
Yes.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Difficult to follow up on such a... But, I mean, you want us to be quick and you want us to talk about everything that has been said today. Amazing amount of richness of diversity. On the relationship between government and private sector, I mean, I wouldn't try to distinguish so strongly. Over the years, and our speaker, David has just mentioned this, you know, we've had antagonistic sides. You know, they are the nasty people who make money. We conservation people are the good people who save the planet. I'm sorry, that's an absolute lie. All these organizations are populated by people who care about the future. They have children, they have interest into the next generation, and if they are getting locked into a system where they have to constantly exploit the system in order to maximize short-term profit, it's because they've been taught to do so. It's because they don't know better. That sounds a bit aggressive, but I mean, that's what I mean. And I think that it's important that we should address this by addressing business education. So I think today we need to move on from our policy of just teaching business graduates to maximize short-term profit into looking at environmental and social return as well, because the planet needs it. The title of our talk today is What Can Nature Do for Us? And I would suggest that what nature can do for us is answering SDG number 1, who you see on the wheel, end poverty. We need to create wealth to be able to end poverty. We cannot create wealth in the same way as we have done for the past 75 years because it is destroying the balance in which we live. And the people who do not realize that yet will realize it soon because the state is more and more evident. We heard we have to go from 2 degrees to 1.5 degrees. I mean, that's already an incredible increase in the effort required from the system. We heard about Asian investors not giving us sufficient, not giving sufficient attention to environmental rating. Well, when the pollution is already as pronounced as it is in China, governments and structure and all the people of goodwill around it will react and will make a change. So I would propose that the resolution here is more of a sort of holistic approach, perhaps even a humanistic approach. Our world needs help, and collectively we can make it. Thank you.
So super quick, because I know we're going to get, you guys are hungry also. So I'm going to start, Sanjan, your point is good, but I think there's a missing leg on that stool. Governments and business are starting to work together, and we have seen a shift. However, civil society plays a huge role on that, and we are not factoring in. In the fourth revolution statement, we're talking about private-public partnerships, and we're not factoring in how civil society can play an important ambassadorial role on making sure that one side or the other are listening to each other and that we're coming up with successful initiatives and innovation. And on that, I want to go to John's point. I'm not sure if he's, oh, you're there. Because I think part of the reason why the markets are not realizing the value that the SDGs have in their stock value is because we have not factored in some of the information that maybe civil society actually has. And how can we come together? And I want to stress on an element, and hopefully, like Ruth, we can start talking about collaborating, working together, hand in hand, really realizing the value that each of us bring to the table so we can actually put it in the mix. The last thing that I'm going to say is going to Martin's point. I am not sure that a new scale for biodiversity is going to help us because people don't understand. I mean, the 1.5 degree synced because people understand what Celsius means. We have to come up, and I think part of the reason why biodiversity is still low in that quadrant of the WEF report is because people don't understand it. But it's not because the data is not there. It's because we, the conservation community, have failed to work with you to make it understandable. And that's why the post-2020 agenda that the CBD has right now is so crucial to come with a very down-to-earth, understandable language that is catchy. So people can understand that unless we actually conserve and protect and restore nature, we're not going to make it happen.
Thank you. I'm going to pick up on one of the comments which I think hasn't been addressed yet, which our colleague drew attention to. Society has actually made some amazing shifts, and I think drawing attention to the fact, for example, that we've outlawed slavery. We've taken action on the most exploitative forms of child labor. The world has been making, over the last few years, some significant strides in relation to gender equality. These are big value shifts. And what we're talking about here is also about a shift in values. I think it's really important, again, to reconnect and to draw lessons from the fact that society is capable of doing discontinuous things. We've done discontinuous things in the past very successfully. This is going to require a discontinuous shift. And it's obviously the intelligent thing to do. We've all been saying this. It's the smart thing to do. But it's also the right thing to do. And that's really important because that moral argument should never be lost. So I just want to conclude with that point. Let's not forget the moral case.
Thank you very much. And now we want to hear from you. As Mike Rand said at the beginning, we're going to have some facilitated table discussions. Food will be served, so don't despair. And the question that we're presenting to you is, how can we integrate nature? How can we integrate nature into the delivery of sustainable business and the SDGs? So we'd like your reflections on that. We'll try to capture some of that through note-taking, and we're hoping that that will then serve to inform work that we're going to continue to do through the Cambridge Conservation Initiative, and I hope, to pick up your point, that we can do collaboratively with many of you. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll get back to you right at the end of the session. Enjoy lunch. Bon appétit. Thank you very much to our panelists.
Sorry to interrupt. As you just heard, if you're willing to stay with us for lunch, we'd be delighted. It will be served very quickly. Each table has a business leader or civil society leader on it who has agreed to host a discussion at your table, and one of the panel members or a CCI staff member will join you. If there is any table that does not have a host, let me know and we'll sort it out. Thank you.